What's up, heroes? I could not wait for this interview. Today we've got Andrew Sinclair, better known as Approaching Nirvana. Andrew is a full-time musician supported by his amazing online community. In the last decade, he's released 17 albums, including over 300 songs. He has over 130 million Spotify streams alone, and if you count all platforms, his catalog has over 300 million streams, all independent and without a label. Andrew's catalog and his music is so epic, I had to do a double episode, so I hope you enjoy this full interview all in one recording. During the interview, Andrew talks about isolated frequencies and why this may be his last big album, how he achieved his early success on YouTube, and his secrets for being such a prolific musician.
But the goal in structure is really to maximize the amount of time you can get into flow state, which is where most of your really good stuff comes from.
But first, cue the intro music. All right, Andrew, welcome to the Producer Life podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I have really been looking forward to this interview. You are an amazing producer, and you've got an absolutely epic catalog of music with over 240 tracks on Spotify and an amazing range of music from EDM to dubstep to progressive house. So I think this is going to be an awesome interview, and I'm really excited to have you here.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the kind words. Yeah, it's been a while, and I guess I'm really fortunate to be in this position because I've been doing this professionally almost for a decade, and it's really I have the thanks of my fans and the support that they give me over the years. And man, it feels like I've grown up together with some of them, so it's been really cool.
That is phenomenal, and I am definitely wanting to talk about sort of the fan base that you've built and how you've done that. You mentioned it's been a while. When I was looking back through interviews, frequently when I do these podcasts, I go back and I listen to interviews from years past, and like the most recent one I could find was 2014. What's been going on since then?
Yeah, I mean, to be totally honest, I don't really do too many interviews. I'm mostly sort of head down focused and making sure I get stuff out and working in the studio. Yeah, I mean, a lot's happened since 2014. We just finished 2020, so certainly that was a ridiculous year. But yeah, I've sort of gone through some ups and downs, and obviously the industry's been changing both in the mainstream area with like proper shows and producers, and like that's what I call the mainstream side of the industry, just because I feel like I kind of straddled that as well as like YouTube and sort of indie artists. And man, I think that both sides of that industry have really changed over the last 6 years, and I've had to adapt a little bit. And also, you know, from a quality standpoint, that's been my big focus over the last 5 years, is really upping my quality from a personal standpoint in my music.
Okay. You mentioned you are straddling sort of the mainstream and the indie movements, and I certainly see that. You've got some collaborations with some, mainstream artists, and at the same time, you've released stuff on NCS. You are doing a lot of independent releases. What are your aspirations? Are you headed one direction or the other?
I guess, I mean, and that question is a good one, and I think it makes me think of the reason that I got into it is when I was in college, going through an engineering degree, I was pretty okay at that. Good, I guess some people would say, but like I did not like it. And so I just wanted to make a living doing what I love. I feel like that goal is still true. And I think that has sort of morphed over time to be, I just want to write music for myself and for my fans. And I feel like that is where that stems from, and why I sort of straddle the two industries, because I like a lot of mainstream music. And I don't say mainstream from like a genre standpoint, just like stuff that's released on labels and in the quote unquote industry. And then I like a lot of independent artists and a lot of the YouTube communities that are built organically. And I feel like that's the key to my success over the years. But I'm happy to do a lot more mainstream oriented or label oriented tracks if that's what makes sense. I think this focus is mainly on quality as well moving forward. And I'd like to work with as many people that, see the same thing that I do in music and connecting people, and especially, in recent times with all the world stuff going on. But yeah, I think that's been my goal. And I think moving forward, I'm open to anything. I'm a little bit honed on some of the types of genres that I'm writing a little bit more than I have been in years past, because I've been able to sort of freely write, which again is something that I'm super fortunate for. But at the same time, that does bring challenges, because your brand has to be this overarching, a little bit more generic thing that can sort of pivot and do all these different things. And I think having a more focused sound does lend a little bit more to a more cohesive brand. And so that's something that I am looking at and I am interested in.
It's interesting to me that you bring up the cohesive brand, because I'm looking at your most recent release, which I definitely want to talk about, Isolated Frequencies from last year.
Mm-hmm.
And this album is tagged with chill, drum and bass, dubstep, EDM, electronic, future bass, progressive house, trance, and then Denver, which is, of course, a location, not a genre. But so how do you feel like your fans have responded to this incredibly diverse body of work that you have?
Yeah, I do think that the general fan base is a little bit more receptive to specific genres, because they know what to expect. If you look on Spotify, that's really what does well. Not only for me, but just generally speaking. Like if you've built an audience on a specific sound, genre, or just style, then they want more of that. But at the same, I mean, it's like any entertainment industry. They want more of it, but they also want you to, iterate on it, and without going back and changing what you did, which is very hard to do in any form of media. But I like to think that from my perspective, you are able to keep it fresh if you can do more creatively in different areas. Sometimes that means that you break off into different aliases. You said a lot of bigger producers doing that, especially, in the last year, because they've had time to do that. And then you also see, I think, just like my hardcore fan base, which I think is what you want to aim to build over a long term. They enjoy a lot of the different genres, because it's not just the same stuff outputted. And especially, like, I try to output at least once a month, and vary it a little bit, but still keep my focus is to be specific and tailored towards what, I'll use air quotes for this, an approaching Nirvana sound would be. And I'm still working on that. I know, I mean, maybe we'll talk about that a little later, but I think that, like, as a producer or an artist, you're trying to find whatever your sound is. And that's something that doesn't happen overnight. That happens over your entire career. And 20, 30 years might be what it takes. Some people find it really quickly and they just like iterate on that. But I think it's a personal journey. And I think that my hardcore fan base sort of loves that I've been, touching on a lot of the different genres. But I would say that, you have to sort of taper that, or temper your expectations with that. And from a production standpoint, and make sure that you're giving people what they signed up for. Like when they follow you, they signed up for whatever they followed you for. And so if you ignore that, then you're going to lose them at some point. So I do think it's sort of a balancing act.
Yeah. You've certainly taken your listeners on quite a journey. My jaw dropped when I looked at the number of tracks you had on Spotify, 240 tracks. So I'm sitting over here counting on my fingers going, man, that's an average of 2 tracks a month for the last 10 years.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
How do you do that? I know lots of producers that struggle to release quarterly,
sure,
maybe monthly. How do you keep up that production pace?
Wow, I've never done the math on that. When you put it like that, it's a little ridiculous. I do think the main thing when you're doing anything that involves art is to make sure that you're always creating. So one of the things that I found early, and it's funny that you mentioned that number, because in 2011, before Lapse in Time, which is sort of the first EDM release that I had, I basically wiped the slate clean. And I think I basically removed 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 albums worth. It was well over 150 songs.
Wow.
Just from a quality standpoint. They were cool. And I'd gotten a fair amount of views on a few of them, but I just felt like a fresh start was what Approaching Nirvana needed at that time. It was also more in a pop direction, so it didn't make sense. But like, I think the only place people can find those is like, I think a legacy package or something I put together for one of my Kickstarters in 2015, and I think that's available on Bandcamp or something. But the point remains that just the reason I mention that is just to give you an insight over it's actually more. And there's also, as any producer has, I have a ton of projects that I haven't released. And I just feel like you always need to be in the studio creating, like, and the more you create, the more that you can be a little choosy with what you release. And then your quality overall, especially from the outside looking in, goes up. And I feel like that's been sort of my moniker. If I look back now, I don't think that 50% of the stuff that's actually released reaches that bar of quality that I'm setting for myself now, or probably even more, to be honest. And you see a lot of producers do that. I feel like Porter Robinson did that at some point once he moved on into like his world stuff. But like, I just, you always have to create, and every piece of music is a little piece of you at that time. And I feel like you have to learn to be okay with that and just move forward with releasing and understand that it's part of the journey. And I feel like that's been my outlook. And I feel like that's pretty much why I've released so consistently over the years.
Can you walk me through a day in the studio and kind of the life cycle of a project?
Sure. So I think that, all right, I should preface this by the fact that one of my biggest rules as I've been doing this is to keep a consistent structure. I feel like all the stuff that we're talking about and releasing consistently and working in different projects and being, you know, creatively prolific, if you will, is trying to keep a structure. And that sounds a little bit counter to, you know, being creative, because you want to be free and have the ideas flowing. But the goal in structure is really to maximize the amount of time you can get into flow state, which is where most of your really good stuff comes from. And that's you know, when you're in the studio, those are the sessions where everything just spills out. Mm-hmm. And that's not always going to happen. So it's going to be hard sometimes to get in the studio. So that's what I want to preface that. And I feel like that's my goal, is to make sure that's consistent. So I do sort of a 9 to 5. It varies a little bit. I do have a little bit of flexibility, but my first session is usually a creative session for about 2 hours where I write new ideas. Then I go through and do admin stuff for about an hour or two, emails, all that kind of stuff. And after that, I will revisit and probably do, depending on the day, a more focused and oriented hour-long session, usually targeted towards like sound design or, you know, building out, say, a drum loop that I throw into like my personal production library, something like that. And then after that, you know, take a break for lunch. And then I pretty much have two, what I like to call flex sessions, with breaks in between, for the rest of the day, that it's like, all right, look at what to-do list, what are the projects there, and schedule a session. And I also make sure to pick a goal for that session. If you're picking a project that's a work in progress that you've already greenlit for release, or for finishing at the very least, then what are you doing on it? Are you going through and taking it from the idea stage to a full arrangement? Are you going to, you know, sit there and try to put it in a different genre because you had an idea about, say, the musical idea that would work better in a different genre? You know, stuff like that. That's like, I feel like when you sit down and you're a little bit more, you're like, oh, I'll just go work on this project. I feel like a lot of times I end up wasting time in that situation. So I've tried, you know, more recent years to get more specific about what the goal of each session in those sessions are, because that's how you finish projects. And yeah, in terms of the, I guess, the process, or I guess start to finish on a project, usually it starts with those idea sessions, and I actually stream some of them to over on Twitch sometimes. And you know, it's really there just to create a well-rounded idea. It doesn't have to be great, doesn't have to be finished, but like, you know, something where you can see a song come out of that. And after that, I sort of go through, and if I feel like it has promise, then I go through those other sessions and move into basically doing like, you know, a more serious sound design session and a more serious effects session. And I'm trying to think of like what the order is. It changes on the songs to songs, but I do feel like those sessions are really what takes it from an idea to an actual song. And then from there, you get into like the literal production stuff of like, okay, this sounds good, but I need this type of sound. Let's go sound design that. Okay, that sounds good. Maybe this needs this type of drop. Let's sit here and work on the drop and like, you know, make sure the kick works with the key of the song and the side chains all work together and yada, yada, yada. And then after that, it's basically mixing and mastering. And then I like to put a little bit of space after I do a first master, and then come back and sort of do reference mastering and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
That's a lot. Hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. That's good. It sounds like a big part of it is chunking your time and
Mm-hmm.
allocating time specifically to specific processes. How many tracks are you usually actively working on at once? Do you do it sequentially, or do you usually have a couple going at a time so you can set one aside for a few days and sort of let it percolate and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I guess I don't have a specific exact process to this, but I would say I'm working on anywhere from 2 to 5 tracks at a time. Um, but I think that varies. I think that's general. Like if I had to pick a general month, that's probably what it looks like. And there's also side projects and other things that come in. So it's like stuff that, I'll do from a producer standpoint that's not necessarily specifically approaching Nirvana. And that could be admin stuff. That could be, when I say admin stuff, not like emails, like I'm talking about saving patches from previous songs to build out that library, working on getting templates together for all the different genres. I think that that's something that is a little unique to what I do is I write in all these genres. So you need templates to sort of iterate quickly instead of just one template. If you write, say, just future bass. Yeah, I think that's probably maybe 2 to 5. Yeah.
Okay. With your templates, I know I've heard that is a good strategy from a bunch of other producers. What can you describe in general? What goes into your templates? Do you have select sounds that you like, plugins for each genre, mastering chains? What do your templates kind of look like? And you're in Pro Tools, right?
Oh, I'm actually in Logic. Basically, I have a very basic template that I think it's very important to have. Like, I mean, I guess this comes with depending on what software you're using, but like key commands and what in Logic is called window sets, I think. So I have like a 2-screen setup, but I have basically my 1 to 9 is all set up on like, arrange on this side, mixing on this side, arrange on this side, piano roll on that side, stuff like that. So I have like a really basic setup that's almost blank with like an instrument and an audio. That's where I start if I'm like starting fresh. And then I have sort of what I like to call like song shells. And those are basically where I take previous songs and sort of build them out into what the shell of the song was. And that's usually like the percussion and the effects. And I sort of break that out into keyed effects, i.e. like stuff that's in the key of the song, and non-tonal effects, so atonal stuff. So like, a dubstep preset or template might have, all of the whooshes and, atmospheric effects and basically the sort of the sound bed of what sets a song in there. And it varies from time to time because obviously if you do that a little too much, then you end up writing sort of the same song, but a little different. So you got to be careful. But I would say that from a general standpoint, the genre specific templates have basically a lot of the stuff that I personally don't work on first. And because I start with like chords and melodies, that's where I come from. And having to sit there and like sample surf and select a kick that sounds good, what I'm looking for, is really what takes me out of the creative process. And I'd like to do that in a different session and come back and rehash if I greenlight the idea. So I try to get all that stuff out of the way. And my recommendation from a top-down standpoint of looking at templates is think about what gets in your way in the creative process and have that stuff somewhat taken care of before you write. And that's the way a template should work for you. And that's what I've tried to do for myself. So, I think there's also other specific templates. I have orchestral templates that are basically just because I write cinematic stuff too, but don't really release it. But those templates are much larger in terms of like the amount of instruments that are in there. And yes, that will sort of have a lot of contact libraries or some east-west stuff, and basically so that I can load it up and then just get going with an idea. I think that's the important thing for a template.
Okay, great. We've sort of talked in general about your production flow. I want to go back to Isolated Frequencies and talk about that album, which when one word comes to mind for me about Approaching Nirvana, it is epic. Everything seems to be big and powerful, and even this album has 22 tracks, which to me is just huge. I think most albums probably average a dozen tracks or so. Talk to me about that album and some of the collaborations that you did on it.
Sure. I guess I'll first touch on the amount of tracks. Some of my most successful albums in the past have been these really, really large compilation albums. And the reason that is because one, I felt like I started doing this around 2013, 2014. I felt like giving the fans a value proposition that they can't refuse in terms of the number of tracks on an album was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then on a networking side, it was something that if I released an album with 22 tracks, at the time I was reaching out to a lot of YouTubers and people on live streaming. I don't even know if Twitch was a thing at that point, but like basically a lot of other creators in other industries that had a need for music because of copyright. And it didn't work like it does today. Back in the day, you could get a strike on your channel if you used, I don't know, a copyrighted song. And so if you got 3 strikes, your channel was gone. And so if you want to make money on YouTube, you had to figure it out. That was just a problem that presented itself. So in reaching out to them, I felt like that was also a value proposition. If I give, those content creators 22 songs, they can be a little bit versatile in what they use. And then I could write also a little bit different in terms of genre. And then it's a situation where everybody wins. So like, if you go to listen to an album, you're like, wow, that's 20 tracks or plus. I think I've had some that are like 23 or 24, but like, yeah, I feel like that was what I was doing at the time. Now, keep in mind, at that point, iTunes was really the big thing in terms of the music industry. And this was as Spotify was still in its infancy. Albums were still something that supported. And unfortunately, that's not the way the industry is today. But the reason I'm explaining this is because this album is an homage to my fans. This is basically the last big the big compilation album that I'm doing because Spotify really doesn't support these large albums. A lot of tracks get buried. You see that on this album literally, and you see it on bigger artists as well. And unless you have a massive marketing budget, you can't individually promote each track. And so moving forward, I'm definitely going to be focusing on the smaller ones. But this was an homage to the way I used to release back in the day, 2013, 14, most likely Not Even Once and Animals, those 2 albums. And I wanted to sort of give back to my fans just because I think this is going to be, from a quality standpoint and from a brand standpoint, a bit of a turning point for me. I'm a lot more focused on releasing singles now, being more specific about quality. So that's why that's so long. And I wanted to do that. It's basically a story of the last 2 years for me. And obviously the title's a bit of an homage to the last year. But yeah, I mean, this whole album is about the people that have supported me to get this far. And I think that was very important for me. And from a stylistic standpoint, or I guess an emotional standpoint, you mentioned the word epic. And that's something that I've always tried to put into my compositions. It's something that when I think about what Approaching Nirvana like means to me, or what my musical journey is it is literally the process of going on a journey. And I feel like that's what I try to do with each song. That's what I try to do with each album. And a lot of that ends up being, sort of either that epic feel, whether that's literally epic, because there are some of the songs in there that I really pushed for to be that type of like really big sound and, intense, but like energetic stuff. But I also feel like it needs to be balanced out a little bit by like the intro and outro songs are really laid back and they sort of build up to that. And that's like, it's all about telling a story with music. Like, I think releasing tracks is fine. If you just release songs because they sound cool, that's great. But I feel like you can connect to more people if you have an emotional story behind each song. And yeah, like in terms of collaborations, I really think working with other people that share your views and commitment to quality and, telling a story is important. And I feel like that usually ends up in making a better song and a better piece of art, depending or no matter what industry you're in. And the people that I worked with on this album are Sounder and Alex Holmes. And Sounder is awesome. She's on the second track. She's actually based in Denver as well.
Mhm.
And yeah, she just has a great voice, and we wanted to create something that was a little bit, I hate to call it beachy, but that's kind of the best word to say it, but sort of a throwback to the old school, 2015 style progressive house anthems that were all over festivals. And I feel like that also came at a time when everybody's striving to want to go do those things. And so that was really fun to work with her. And she sort of put a really nice, I guess, punctuation to the song in terms of like, she really filled out what was missing. And I think that that's important when you look for collaborators, and she did an amazing job, and she has a really great voice. Would recommend, please check her out. And then the
Okay.
other two tracks that are vocals are with Alex Holmes. Well, actually there's three more, but I sang on the other one. So for Alex Holmes, she is based in London, and she has a lot of work on like traditionally released label tracks, including, I believe, Armada and Universal and a few others. But she's also amazing. I worked with her on What If, which was great. That's sort of about, your hesitancies, worries, and excitements at the beginning of a relationship. And I think that's a really cool song because you can kind of view it as both ways of being excited about it or being scared about it. And, I'll leave it up to the listener in terms of what they want to pull from that. But that was a really fun one to work on. She just nails it with quality as well.
Mhm.
And then Unleash Me was great too. That's just that was sort of my stab at future bass, and it was really, really fun to write that together with her. So
Yeah. And you've worked with her before. You did Darkness Comes a while back, kind of a drum step track, right?
yeah, as it from a branding perspective, a little bit confusing, I know, but yeah, it's actually a really intense drum and bass track, and it like so that one was released with NCS, and um yeah, I just like, I don't know, man. I was working with like, I don't know, like neuro basses at the time, and just experimenting, and built it out into a drum and bass song just for fun. And then I showed it to some of my fans. They really liked it. And so it was one of the songs I have originally showed to Alex Holmes when I first met her. And she liked it. And she also liked the fact that it wasn't normally what she wrote, because a lot of her stuff is like trance and progressive house. And yeah, she just killed it. I really, really like that song.
Yeah, me too. Now you're in Denver, she's in London. So how, when you say met, was this a virtual meeting or did you guys actually run across each other? How did that meeting occur?
Sure. So I originally met her on a site called Vocalizer. I think it's kind of like, I think there's a couple of those types of sites, basically like Fiverr, but for vocalists.
Hmm.
And I think another one's Sound Better. If you guys need
Yeah.
vocals, like there's tons of amazing vocalists on there of all styles. And so I definitely recommend reaching out on there. But I reached out originally for like a side project I was working on. And then we ended up working on, oh gosh, it was, the instrumental was Sundown. Uh, for the life of me, I can't remember the name of the song. I'm so sorry. But we ended up working on something that like I had already written vocals for, and it was, she just like killed it on the quality front. And so I was like, hey, do you want to work on some original stuff? And she was totally on board. We worked on a couple of those tracks, and then I was actually in, I think that was in 2017, and then in 2018, or maybe it was at the end of 2017, that I went and lived in London for a month. And then did a little bit of a stint. I did like a meetup in London with my fans, and sort of a meetup in Amsterdam with my fans. And when I was in London, I got the chance to meet her. And so I think we had like a coffee or something, and just chatted about the industry, and just started a what's been a really awesome, longstanding work relationship. And she's great.
That's awesome. I actually am releasing a interview with Sandra Bullitt, who's a vocalist that I hired on Fiverr about 3 or 4 years ago. She's Portuguese, and almost had a chance to have a coffee with her when I was in Portugal 2 years ago, and just barely missed it. But I'm kind of hearing parallels there in your story and my own. So that's neat. I've enjoyed that aspect of the music business, being able to meet and work with a really diverse, creative lot of people.
Yeah, for sure.
Talking about sort of diversity, the first place I think I came across your work was with your Avengers remix. I think I was just on Google searching for Avengers remix because this was shortly after maybe Age of Ultron came out or something. And, I was just like, man, that soundtrack is epic. I wonder if anybody's ever remixed it. And yours was right there, number one on Google. And I still absolutely love your take on the theme song there. And then I started going through your tracks on YouTube, and you've got all sorts of amazing geeky remixes from Harry Potter to Mandalorian to, it's just a geek's wet dream, if you'll excuse the expression. It is
Sure.
awesome. So, but I was curious as I'm looking at these, like some of them you've actually released on Bandcamp, your Mandalorian, for example. How does the licensing work for that?
Right. So I think in terms of licensing and copyright, first and foremost on YouTube, it's maybe a recent thing where you can maybe last 2 or 3 years where they've moved from DMCA and Content ID to having sort of bigger copyright holders be open to sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big thing. That's really what greenlit me to do a lot of like the movie stuff, because man, you got to be a little careful with all that stuff. I think a lot of video games are kind of just like, whoa, cool. Like, and that's it. And they're just like happy it exists. Whereas, sort of the movie industry is pretty well established compared to the game industry. So they kind of see copyright a little differently, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's coming around. I think that's the way it works on YouTube. So if you guys want to do remixes on YouTube, you can opt to share it, and that's sort of how I've done that on YouTube. From a Bandcamp perspective, first and foremost, all of those are free to download. And there is an option if people want to basically donate. But the flip side to that is there's a lot of distributors that work on cover licenses, because technically that's my performance, a cover
Okay.
of a soundtrack song, and so. You can work with, so I work with DistroKid, and they've been great for what I need, and they sort of can do that on the back end. I'm
Wow. Okay.
working on potentially looking to get them up to Spotify, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I was aware of websites like Easy Song Licensing,
Mm-hmm.
for that sort of thing. I was not aware that DistroKid will actually handle that for their artists. Is there an additional cost to that, or how does that work?
I'm actually not sure. It's something that's basically on my agenda to look at this year, because I do feel like, specifically for me, the Avengers remix has a lot of views on it. So I'm kind of missing out not having it on Spotify. But,
Yeah.
I do think that it's like, I'm an independent artist and I just like making music. But at the same time, like, I like doing stuff with things that I like, if that makes sense. And the Avengers theme was one of those, as well as all the other remixes. That being said, I want to make sure everybody is getting rewarded for, what they have done in the project. That goes for my approach for vocalists, but in this, or collaborators or whatever. But in this specific thing, I think it's Alvin Silvestrini. I don't know if that's a correct pronunciation,
I'm
but
not sure.
he wrote the original theme, so he should absolutely, like, for each sale or view, he should get credited and paid for that. Like, that's the way the industry should work. So, you want to be pretty specific about that. I don't think specifically DistroKid charges for that, but maybe. I can't really give you a solid answer on that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. I have really liked YouTube's model where they allow copyright holders to monetize. So, any advertising that happens on your channel, and obviously you've got a huge YouTube channel with over 300,000 subscribers, they would receive the money for that specific video, as opposed to like Twitch's or Facebook's approach, where if you play somebody else's track, then it just gets muted, and it spoils everybody's experience and nobody
Right.
gets paid.
Yeah, I would agree. And the funny thing is, YouTube wasn't always the good guy. Like, it's a pretty good system now. But I remember when, if someone basically claimed your video, they could get all the ad revenue, even if it was a false claim. And they've since fixed a lot of that and stuff. But I think that's probably because YouTube got sued 10 years ago.
As a way of getting people's attention.
Yep.
I've been live streaming on YouTube a lot in 2020, and was really amazed at how accurately their Content ID system picked up other people's tracks that I was playing, and I felt good about that.
It's pretty scary, though.
Yeah, it is. That's true. The AI in general. I've been using sort of on a related topic. I've been using Google Photos for a long time, and
Oh,
I've
sure.
got a Prius, and I was searching for. I've had a couple of Priuses over the years, and I was searching for Prius in my photos, and Google Photos is able to not only identify cars but even makes of cars,
Goodness.
which was fascinating, useful, and terrifying all at
Yeah.
once.
Yeah,
So
it's the AI driven technology is really impressive. I think Content ID is one of those things that if it's used for good, I'm really excited about it. But it does scare me because it's one of the big reasons I don't use as many sample packs these days that have like vocals in them, because even if you're just using it, say for a phrase in one of your songs, sometimes Content ID can pick that up if it was copyrighted with like a label song. So it's one of those things where like there's all this gray area that exists, but I do agree with you. It is really cool, and I want to make sure that, if you're using content on your streams and on your videos, that the artists get rewarded for that.
yeah, talking about samples, I am hesitant for similar reasons to take sample packs from just anybody. I tend to go to Loop Cloud. I tend to go to Cymatics. Companies that I trust, because I worry about somebody accidentally having a sample that isn't cleared and then me thinking it is and winding up with some sort of legal action there.
Right. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you just have to know your industry, and over the time, as you get experiences, take other producers' sort of takes on it and ideas of like what is reputable, and also do your research. And also, when you download a sample pack, as you basically alluded to, make sure there's like a license in there, because that would cover you in the event that for some reason there isn't something cleared in there. If they have something that says these are all cleared, then you're good. Then it just goes on to them whether or not they cleared it. So it's one of the sides of the industries that's not, super fun. Everybody likes like making music, releasing music, and listening to music, but like you got to be a little bit specific about copyright and licensing, because it's a serious thing, and long term, I think it's how you get paid.
Yeah. One of the other interesting things as I was researching for this podcast is that you clearly spend a phenomenal amount of time in the studio and you've released a lot of music, but it doesn't look like you've spent a lot of time performing. And I was curious, was that a deliberate decision, or is that just you prefer to spend your time in the studio, or?
Sure, I think that's a fair question. I think it's a bit of both. It's funny you asked that question, because at this time last year, I was like, you know what? One of my goals for 2020 is I really want to get more into the touring side of the industry and investigate it and see if I can make that work. Obviously, not the best year for that. And
Nope.
yeah, I'd still like to, but I think, given the setup that I have, I'm fortunate, in this time to be still making music and having people listening to it. So I'm certainly
Yeah.
thankful for that. But at the same time, like touring's really, really fun. And I have done a few. Most of my events usually are at conventions, corporate events, or even smaller festivals. Stuff that like pays you money to go places, because touring can be really, really rough. It can be very profitable if you get on the right tour or if you have the right contacts. But I do feel like, I do talk to a lot of my friends in the industry, and it's fun, but it can be very stressful. It can be, you're in one city one night and you in one city the next night. And while that's fun for the first week or month, if you're doing that for 6 months, that's really, really draining. And it also means, how do you write music at the same time and keep up the other side of your career?
Yep.
So I've sort of looked at that as like, well, I'm kind of like riding a river essentially. Like if it took me to touring, I would do a lot more, because I've done shows and it's very fun. And it's just like the energy at shows. I do live streams every week, which replicates a little bit of that online, but like it's not the same thing. And, being at a show, you don't get the adrenaline on a stream, like a little bit, sure, when you're first doing it. But like I've been doing live streams for 8 years. So it's like, I don't necessarily avoid touring, but I don't think that right now it makes sense. I think the events that make sense for an independent artist like me, especially where I come from on YouTube and that type of atmosphere, or I guess type of audience, is doing stuff like meetups. Sometimes those meetups include performances and just like it's more of us just hanging out. A much like scaled down version of a normal performance, but it's more about, if you think about touring, it can be a tool that can definitely pay your bills for a lot of producers. And I know a lot of producers that make most of their money touring, outside of this past year. And that's great. And again, outside of this past year, that can be a great business plan. But I think that the smartest thing to do is to make sure you have your feet in both sides and make sure that you diversify your business a little bit so that, if people aren't listening to music anymore, I can still tour. And that's something that I'm looking at moving forward.
Okay. You mentioned meetups with fans. So what does that look like? Is that just, hey, I'm going to be in this city at this time, let's get together and hang out? Or is it, you kind of sell tickets to this private, intimate event where you're going to put on a little performance, then hang out with them? Or what does that look like?
Right. So that's a good question. I think that in the past, I haven't done a meetup since about 2017, 2018, just because, it usually involves me traveling somewhere because most of my fan base is either on New York, LA, or I think Europe. Although it is spreading out. There's a fair amount that are in Asia now, which is really, really cool. Mm-hmm. But anyways, the meetups I've done in the past haven't been paid. I feel like there's enough things that I'm monetizing online that, unless I'm doing a really structured performance, I don't really want to sell tickets to it. So okay. I've thought about it. I've thought about like figuring out how to do a show like that. But as soon as you get into that area, that's the areas that are covered by like touring agents and event managers. And like, my question has always been like, if you're doing it all yourself, you have to do all the booking, all the, marketing and all of the selling yourself. Whereas if you are just touring, sometimes you might have to do some of those things, specifically selling your tickets, but you don't have to do all of them. When you show up for the show, you just show up, and play. And that's great. But if it's a meetup with tickets, I feel like that sets a different expectations. My goal for these type of things is really community engagement and trying to give back and just hang out. I think that in my place, I'm a much smaller, like I have a following, but it's much smaller than someone that's well established. And I feel like for me, it's important to nurture that and make sure that the people that are supporting me are, getting really unique stuff that they wouldn't get from someone that's at, on massive festival stages.
Sure. You also, in addition to events, you talked about, in addition to meetups, you mentioned events. What sort of events were you referencing?
So in the past, I've worked with, an example of a corporate event that I've done has been something where, because on YouTube, I was involved pretty, how do I put this? On YouTube, I was pretty much the Minecraft musician for a good amount of years in terms of like YouTube content. If you search like Minecraft Let's Play and you look at any video that's up from like 2011 to 2015, most of the time it probably has my music in it. Same thing with like Minecraft time lapses. So I sort of became associated with Minecraft as a brand. And obviously, I didn't know at that point in time that it would become basically the biggest game in the world, but now it's that. And so, man, I think this was last year. I was invited out by the makers of Minecraft because I have a lot of friends over there. I think it's Mojang is the proper pronunciation, but I always call them Mojang. But they're super cool people over there, and they were having just a celebration for their company, and they invited me out, and I went to Sweden and sort of played for their, like, I think it was their 10-year anniversary, and it was really fun. And like, there was a stage, but it wasn't like a show. It was kind of just me hanging out with my friends playing music, and that was really cool. And they were really nice, and it was something that was really unique. And I've done a couple of those, but like it's those types of events, and then conventions is a lot of things. Again, those don't really exist right now, but
right.
Back in the day, I would sort of target a fair amount of like video game conventions. So I've been to like E3 and PAX, which is the Penny Arcade Expo here in the US, as well as Minecon, ironically enough. And I've played at a fair amount of those, and sort of that's like a networking opportunity for me, and also a way to sort of give the people that provide content or create the games a way to like let loose and also, build your contact base.
Yeah, that's great. I love those sorts of conventions. I've been to Dragon Con a couple times, which is
cool.
I describe as sort of a convention for anybody that doesn't fit mainstream. They've got a little bit of everything, but
Sure.
it's a blast. So hopefully in the next year or two, we'll be able to get back to those big conventions again. You mentioned the importance of diversifying your income as a musician, and one of the things as I was looking at this incredible back catalog you've got is that you've also got a lot of very cinematic pieces. Do you do any sync licensing?
I've done a little bit. Sync licensing is a separate beast, I think, and it really depends on like what you want to do and where you want to spend your time. Personally speaking, it's a big goal of mine at some point to push into that side of the industry, because I feel like when you write for sync, the payoffs can be very large depending. Think about some of the bands that have been on, say, Apple commercials, or any of the music that you hear on an event like the Super Bowl that's been written for the Super Bowl, but it's not like any, real person's, like, it's not like someone released that on Spotify. Someone wrote that for the event. And those types of things are opportunities that are few and far between. And I feel like that is something that as an artist, either you have to be going 100% at that side of the industry to really make it big, or you have to work on it over time. So I've basically taken the second option. And I think over time, I think that I'd like to do a lot more of that. But I think it's, from a producer standpoint, you got to look at what your skills are, and you got to look at how most to leverage those skills to create a career for yourself, because no one else is going to do it for you. So, if you could produce music and you like cinematic stuff, yeah, the EDM crowd's probably not going to eat that up, but like, where else can you put that? So I've done a fair amount of like trailer music-esque stuff, and you can find those influences in some of my songs, but like, or some of my EDM releases rather. But, it's something that I have a passion for, the cinematic stuff. Like I really, really, growing up, I wanted to do music half because of EDM and half because of like video games. Growing up, like listening to the Halo music and hearing how music can be different and how different mediums can change music and how you can create epic sounds and emotions and stories from very simplistic melodies and atmosphere. That's not something you can necessarily create with EDM. Or even like pop music. It needs to be a little bit more straightforward in those genres. But I really would like to do more of that stuff. And it's stuff that some of my fan base has latched on to in the past. But I do, the Cinemax Soundscapes releases were sort of just a labor of love, I think. And the sync licensing is a long-term goal. And I would suggest to anybody listening that you investigate it, see if it works for you. I think that it's just the same as the normal industry. It's all about building a contact base that has, can find your music, right place, right time kind of deal. And that's really like you build out as many songs as you can and start writing, keep writing. And then, at some point you hope that it hits, and you diversify by doing stuff in sync. You diversify by working with people. You diversify by releasing on Spotify. And I think that that's what's important from a business standpoint.
Yeah. Moving to a little more frivolous topic, you talked about video games. Do you have a favorite video game right now?
Oh man. So I don't have a lot of time to play these days, but I would say, man, over the last year or two, probably the game I'm probably playing the most is Destiny, like Destiny 2.
Yeah.
And that's probably because of like a lot of the Halo influences in that. And the music is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing, some of these blockbuster video games, the soundtracks that accompany them.
Yeah, I agree, and it's really impressive, man. What's interesting to me too is you're seeing a lot of artists that, even if they made it big back in the day, are starting to get into the other sides of the industry, writing for film or doing video game soundtracks and stuff like that. It's really cool.
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, even if you don't have time to pursue those industry contacts for sync licensing, there's lots of middlemen that can help with that. Even on this podcast, I had Danny Felt recently who does that. By the time this interview comes out, I'm going to have Zach Jablow, who is with Brain Candy Management. They do sync licensing, and they take a split of it, but you don't have to do the additional legwork. You let somebody else do it for you, so you can focus on what you enjoy.
Yeah, I mean that sounds good. I when you look at yourself as a producer, you have to like do it half as a creative. We've been talking a lot about that, but half as a business, and that's what this is about. And I feel like all those people you mentioned are really killing it in that side of the industry. And I feel like that's just like something that's important from an artist standpoint is, figure out how many places you can have that are generating you income over time. And then, if one takes off, pursue that.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting, man. I'm excited to hear those episodes.
Yeah, I'll make sure you get links to them. I really appreciate your time today. What are your plans in 2021?
Yeah, so basically my plan this year is starting in February, I'm releasing a remix and an original every month. And so that's the big focus on releases. And I'm also doing streams weekly on Twitch, music production every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern U.S. time, and DJ streams every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. Yeah, I'm just really excited. I'm pushing hard on the online stuff, and I'm probably looking to expand for more business opportunities and looking for, whether it be sync stuff or side projects and stuff like that. Is just cool projects, and I think that's from me sitting in the chair, but that from an Approaching Nirvana standpoint, I'm excited because this year is going to be a big focus on the online for me, as it has in the past, but like getting more specific about structure and making sure that, I have releases every single month, and that the fans are enjoying it. So that's really my priority.
It's fantastic. And where can people that haven't heard of you before, where can people find you online?
Sure. So obviously you could just search my artist name on Spotify. That's Approaching Nirvana, 2 words, or any other digital distribution store. And if you want to see the streams, it's twitch.tv/Approaching Nirvana. And my YouTube channel is youtube.com/Approaching Nirvana.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Here are some of my key takeaways. First, Andrew talked a lot about how he's been such a prolific producer, and he mentioned several ideas with the same end state: to maximize the amount of time you spend in flow state being creative in your studio. One of those is using separate templates organized by genre. These don't have to be terribly complicated. In fact, I was a little surprised his template sounded somewhat sparse compared to other producers' templates. Use your templates to take care of things ahead of time that get in the way of your creativity. He also shared an idea for working backwards, creating a song shell from your existing tracks to give you an even more detailed framework for creating future songs. Second, having a consistent structure is key. You have to schedule time to be creative, and a separate time for business and administrative functions. We've heard this concept multiple times before on this podcast from previous guests, including recently Zach Jablow in episode 60 when he talked about time blocking. One of Andrew's other secrets is just spending a lot of time in the studio. As he puts it, you should always be creating. Andrew has chosen to prioritize student time over touring, so he provides a clear example that you don't have to tour to be a successful independent artist if you don't want to. Third, he recommended a service called Vocalizer for finding vocalists, and advised caution using vocal sample packs, even ones that are labeled copyright-free, because even if you have the right to use them, some other producer may have used the same vocal sample and then opted in for sync monetization on YouTube, even though they shouldn't. And that could trigger a copyright claim, which is just a headache. My distributor, CD Baby, for example, specifically says you shouldn't opt in for YouTube sync monetization if you're using samples for precisely this reason. Fourth, look for problems to solve with your music business. In Andrew's case, his early success was driven by solving the copyright problem for YouTube content creators by offering a large catalog of copyright-free music they could use. What's an issue that you could solve in your community? Maybe people need help setting up their live streaming during a pandemic, and you know how to do that. That's a problem you could solve. Or maybe there's no music scene in your favorite genre. That could be a problem you could solve, like Lauren Hardy did back in episodes 3 and 4 with Bass Night Orlando. Just keep your eyes open for problems and realize that each problem could, in fact, be an opportunity in disguise. Finally, Andrew mentioned that he's moving away from album releases because he's found that so many of the tracks from a large album get buried on Spotify unless you've got a huge ad budget, which most of us don't. The reality is that Spotify's algorithm, like most online platforms these days, rewards people for regular quality content. So if you're trying to build your numbers on Spotify, you should focus on frequent releases, perhaps shooting for a single each month rather than an album each year. Hey, if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend and leave a rating and review wherever you're listening. I'll have links for you in the show notes. Just head over to producerlifepodcast.com and look for episode 61. I'm going to wrap up this episode with one of my favorite tracks from Andrew's recent Isolated Frequencies album. It's called Pearlescent. It's also on his playlist of copyright-free music that you can use for your Twitch or YouTube video as long as you give him credit. Until next week, this is the House Ninja, reminding you to be somebody's hero today.